Hello everyone, my name is Olivia, and today I wanted to talk about 5 books that I've recently read that I cannot stop thinking about, and 3 of the books that are featured on this list are actually books that I listen to over on Everand, who is the kind sponsor of today's video. In case you don't know what Everand is, it's an amazing audiobook and ebook subscription service, so you are able to unlock 3 premium titles per month, and that is at the same exact cost as if you were to get an Audible subscription, which only gets you 1 audiobook per month. So the difference between Audible and Everand is that Everand allows you to access ebooks and audiobooks, and I've become truly obsessed with it. It is my go-to place now to listen to audiobooks, and I have some amazing books that I have listened to on Everand that I have to recommend to you because the audiobook experience was truly superb. So if you want to try out Everand for yourself, I have a link down below that allows you to have a 30-day free trial so you could try out the service, see if you like it, and see if you want to sign up for it because the cost is amazing compared to Audible, and I cannot recommend it enough. So thank you so much to Everand for providing me that link to share with all of you. And let's get into the recommendations because guys, I truly think 2025 is my year. I think it's my best reading year so far because everything that I've been reading is top quality, and these 5 books are no exception. So the first book that I listened to on Everand on audiobook was The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. I have a Lord of the Rings series on this channel where I am reading them for the first time. I just finished book 2 on audiobook, and the thing that I wanted to do a little bit differently with book 2 compared to book 1 is read it physically while listening to the audiobook. And when I was looking at the audiobooks on Everand, because they have like multiple Lord of the Rings editions, I noticed that one was narrated by Andy Serkis. Andy Serkis is the voice of Gollum, and he is truly one of the best audiobook narrators that I've ever listened to. The amount of talent within one man is so impressive, and his ability to voice every single character in the Lord of the Rings series in such a distinct way that mimics that of the actors in the movie is so immersive. I felt like I was in the movie while listening to this audiobook, and it completely changed my experience with reading the Lord of the Rings because when I initially read the first book, I was just reading it physically and I was voicing the characters in my mind, and I'm not a big fantasy reader, so it's a little bit harder for me to get into fantasy. It's a little bit more difficult for me to grasp the world and really fall into the prose. But when I listened to book 2, Andy Serkis was reading the book alongside me physically reading it, and that experience made it so much more exhilarating. It made it so much more enjoyable. It was one of my favorite reading experiences. Like, I'll always think of the Lord of the Rings book series and think of Andy Serkis narrating it because the way that he narrates the story and the way that he adds this really rich texture to the entire prose is so impressive. So now that I listened to The Two Towers via Andy Serkis's narration, I cannot go back, and I cannot recommend that audiobook enough, especially if you want to get into the Lord of the Rings series and you're a little bit iffy about it because you're intimidated by the fact that it's a classic fantasy and you're intimidated by the fact that it may just be a fantasy. If you're like me and you barely ever read fantasy, maybe that intimidates you and you don't want to get into the series because you're worried you're not going to enjoy it. I would highly recommend the Andy Serkis narrated audiobooks. He does it for all 3 books, and I'm hoping to read the 3rd one this summer, and I cannot wait to listen to him narrate the 3rd book because his ability to really immerse me in the text was fantastic, and I constantly think about it, and I just wish that he would narrate more audiobooks in the future because he really does have a talent for doing these different voices and bringing these stories to life. He's just a fantastic voice actor overall, so highly recommend listening to the audiobook while reading alongside. It feels so much more exhilarating to do it that way. Another audiobook that I listened to on Everand that I greatly enjoyed was Loud by Drew Afualo. Drew Afualo is a very famous person on TikTok who I always admire. She has this brand where she's really funny and she's not afraid to talk down to misogynists and people who are trying to tear her down or tear other women down. And she wrote this nonfiction about being loud within yourself while also sharing her life and her rise to fame. And I enjoyed this audiobook so much because 1, she narrates it herself, but 2, I found so much value in it. And I think if I had read it when I was younger, I would have enjoyed it so much more. Not to say that I didn't love it. I gave it 5 stars, but this nonfiction is such a powerful nonfiction to remind people of your place in the world and that you should take up space and you should be confident within yourself and you should be confident in what you know and what you bring to the table. And what I love the most about Drew is that she's not only reminding people to uplift themselves but each other, but she's not afraid to talk down to the people who are so dead set on bringing other people down. She's not afraid to clap back at the trolls, and she reminds people that you are deserving of the life that you constantly dream of. And she's just such a big inspiration, and I just love the way that she kind of broke down this nonfiction into not only a memoir but a piece of inspiration for people who are looking for a bit of direction, who are looking for a bit of a confidence boost. And I think that she's just a really cool creator. She's my first ever person from TikTok that I read a memoir by, and I'm not even like a gigantic Drew Afualo fan. I was just always seeing her on my timeline. I really enjoyed her content. I really enjoyed the way that she is not afraid to be loud and be funny and just be herself. So if you're thinking that there's no good book that could come out of TikTok, I disagree, because Loud by Drew Afualo is definitely worth your time, especially if you are looking for something to give you a confidence boost. I feel like if you really enjoy Untamed by Glennon Doyle, you will love Loud, because they kind of hold hands with one another, and I just loved reading Drew's perspective and learning more about her life, and she's just great. And I just love a Virgo. I love a Virgo celebrity. They're my favorite. I love Virgos. The third book that I listened to on Everand that I have a physical copy of but I decided to listen to on audiobook is Cantoras. My friend has been trying to get me to read Cantoras for years now. She's like, you're going to love it, you have to read it, and I kept putting it off because she always told me it's a bit of a sad read, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to get to it, but I finally decided to listen to it, and I fell in love with this story. Cantoras is a historical fiction novel set during the 1970s in Uruguay during the dictatorship, and we follow 5 girls who call themselves Cantoras, and they are sapphic, and they decide to buy a shed by the seaside, and that becomes their safe haven in this world. This is their place for them to be themselves, to be with each other, to have this beautiful place for them to feel untethered by the government that is oppressing them. And we follow these 5 women over the course of 30-something years as they return back to their shed by the seaside, and they come back either alone or with another person or with their friend group. And I found Cantoras to be so compelling because every perspective and every storyline wove together so beautifully. The friendship overall was gorgeous, and I thought that it was so compelling because not only do we get to explore their friendships and their individual lives, but we also explore the ever-changing government in Uruguay and how that changes over the course of 35 years. And there were so many moments that I was listening to this audiobook that I paused it, opened up my book, and highlighted. There were so many compelling moments that reminded me so much of like the current state of affairs in America and how it mimicked that of the dictatorship in Uruguay. And it was also great because I learned so much more about the history of Uruguay, which I wasn't that familiar with, through this historical fiction. And it may just seem like it's a story about these 5 women and how they discover their sexuality and they discover this kinship with one another, but it's so much more than that because the politics is oppressive and it's very much present in every single moment of their life, and it affects their family, it affects their relationship with their parents, it affects themselves. And it's such a dark read, but it's such an enlightening read as well, because yes, the politics were very dark at this time, but it really opened my eyes to what they had to go through in Uruguay during the 1970s onwards. And it also opened my eyes to just this beautiful fictional friendship between these 5 women. And I thought it was just such a great read, and it's not afraid to show you the horrors of intolerance, but I highly recommend it. And I'm really happy that my friend continually told me to read this, because without her I probably wouldn't have picked it up. And the audiobook was fantastic as well. I really loved the narrator, and the moment I started listening to the audiobook, I just couldn't get enough of it. And you know an audiobook is good when I have to pause it to highlight the actual text. That's when you know the narrator is really spitting some facts, you know? Now let's move on to 2 books that I cannot stop recommending to my friends and I cannot stop recommending marketing everywhere. And the first book is called Everything You Ever Wanted by Luiza Sauma. This is written by a Brazilian English author, and we follow our main character who works in London, and she works in marketing. So it's a very, very close to home type of story for me, because whenever there is a show or movie or book centered around marketing, I'm like, oh, I know it's gonna hit close to home. And we follow her as she's living a very monotonous life. She's not happy with her job, with her relationships, with her family, with herself, and she hears about this opportunity called Life on Nyx. Life on Nyx is this new chance to start over on a new planet called Nyx. But the catch is, if you decide to sign up for this opportunity, you cannot return back to Earth. So we follow our main character while she is working this job that doesn't fulfill her. She is in a relationship that leaves her pretty much empty, and she has this growing depression that becomes so suffocating that she decides to sign up to go to Nyx. And what's cool about this story is that we follow her before she goes to Nyx, and then we follow her after she arrives on Nyx and what her life is like on the planet. And the juxtaposition between her life before and her life afterwards is so fascinating. My best friend and I read it, and we were discussing it for hours because there's so many different ways that you can break down this story. But I always have to tell people that if you go into this story, you're not going to get an answer for every question that is posed, because this is a speculative fiction and there's a lot of different ways that you can interpret it. And that's what I love the most about speculative fiction. I don't need to have all the answers, because when do you get all the answers in life? Let's be real. And me and my best friend had completely different interpretations of the story, but we both liked it in different ways. And that's what I love the most about it, because people get different things out of it. And I love a story that makes you think, and I love a story that props up a bunch of questions but doesn't answer a lot of them. And that may annoy a lot of readers, but that's like totally my jam. So I cannot recommend Everything You've Ever Wanted. I keep pitching it as a story for people who love Severance, and I will stick by that, because I think part of the intrigue of Severance is that you're not getting all the answers, and a lot of it is speculation and theorizing and just kind of letting the story take you down a road that you don't know where it's going to lead, and that's what this story felt like. The last book that I have to recommend to you is called The Dry Heart by Natalia Ginzburg. It is translated from Italian by Frances Frenet. This is a book that I believe I saw on TikTok one day, and it was like short books that you can read in one sitting that's gonna change your life, and it's less than 100 pages, and I did read it in one sitting, and it did change my life. So like that TikTok was really like up my alley. We follow this woman who remains unnamed, and we start out literally page 1 with this woman shooting her husband between the eyes, and that immediately hooks you as a reader. And then we flash back to see them before they get married. So we follow the woman as she becomes infatuated with her soon-to-be husband, and we follow their marriage that quickly sours into one of resentment and one of pent-up anger, especially as we are following the woman who is trying to perform the duties of a wife. She's trying to impress her husband, who remains so indifferent to her. I feel like if you love the song Tolerate It by Taylor Swift, you would love this story, because he really does just tolerate her. He really doesn't see her as someone to love and cherish and treat kindly, and she sees him in a light where he is everything in her life. And over the course of this short story, you see her fall in love with him, and then it falls into this poisoned resentment, and you truly understand why she inevitably shoots her husband between the eyes, because you follow the fall of their marriage. The exploration of marriage and the expectations of a wife and a husband in this story is fantastic. It's the type of story that I wish I had physically so I can annotate and really have a conversation in the text, because this feels like the type of story that you should be reading in college with a professor and you can write essays about, because the way that it explores the intricacies of marriage, the intricacies of being a man and a woman during this time period, I believe it's like the 40s or the 50s, and the subtle changes in the wife's view of her husband is so seamless in the story. It is absolutely fantastic. Genuinely one of the best stories that I've ever read. I found it to be so compelling, so interesting. It's definitely something that I want to get a physical copy of, again, to highlight, annotate, reread, because I loved the short and succinct way that we explored a marriage. It reminds me a lot of like an Arthur Miller play where they're always exploring the fall of a family, and how Arthur Miller says, we never told the truth for 10 minutes in this house. And that's what it felt like when I was reading The Dry Heart. They never told the truth for 10 minutes in that house. It was only ever lies and smoke and mirrors. And when the smoke goes away, what happens? The mirrors start to crack, and you see this woman crack. And it's a amazing story. All of these stories were amazing. I am so happy with all the audiobooks I've been listening to. I'm so happy with the international fiction that I've been reading. And let me know if you have any speculative fiction stories that you would highly recommend. Let me know if there are any other stories that you think would be up my alley based on these recommendations. If you want to try out Everand for yourself to get a 30-day free trial to maybe listen to the audiobooks that I recommended, be sure to use my link. It is an amazing service that is a great alternative to Audible. And thank you so much to Everand for working with me in this video. And if you want to follow me anywhere else on social media, all my links will be down below. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've stayed this far, leave a brown heart emoji so we can see who stays for the longest. If you do, thank you so much, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!